Welcome back. Before we move on to the next agenda items, let's play a trivia. Please go again to menti.com and enter the same code as we did before. This is the 454571114. I will ask you 2 questions that you will answer in Menti. Due to the cross-cutting nature of climate action, there are many socioeconomic activities that are addressed in NDCs. The tool previously presented by Dr. Clara Brandy has assessed those activities that gather them in several themes, such as education, infrastructure, resource efficiency, or energy, among others. I see that many of you have started already the quiz, but for those that are not, please submit your answers. Please select those 3 most prominent themes in countries in NDCs. Yeah. Okay, we see energy is on the top. Maybe ecosystems, not that much. All right. Let's just wait a few seconds. Okay, now finance is leading a little bit more. Okay, so I will tell you the correct answers are water, agriculture, and energy. Yeah, all these activities do not only relate to climate action, but also to the implementation of multiple sustainable development goals. In fact, many NDC climate activities entail synergies that can promote several SDGs at once. Now let's dip into those activities and explore the synergies between the climate and sustainable development agendas. For instance, energy. And the next question is, which of the following SDGs have most interlinks with energy-related activities in NDCs? We have 4 options, and you have to choose one. So the first one is gender equality, industry, innovation, infrastructure, clean water and sanitation, or no poverty. So please choose the SDG that you find that you think is the correct answer to this question. Okay, so we see that industry is definitely winning this trivia so far. Let's just wait a few seconds more. Also, we have some participants that answer that clean water is the correct answer. Clean water and sanitation, both of them. Okay. Let's just wait a little bit more. We have more answers. One more for industry. Okay, so I will tell you that the real answer, the correct answer is gender equality indeed. Yeah, so there are many SDGs that have many synergies with energy-related activities. For instance, the SDG number 11 that tackles sustainable cities and communities. But other SDGs, such as gender equality, has many interlinks with energy-related activities. For instance, in many countries, women bear the greatest burden to collect biomass that will be used to cook. This labor is generally unpaid, and it's often linked with air pollution that will mostly affect these women. Therefore, having a source of reliable and clean energy can contribute to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, but also creates the co-benefits for enhancing women's lives and achieve the gender equality goals. Thank you very much for participating in this trivia. I hope that you enjoy it and that maybe you're a little bit surprised. And now I'm going to hand it over to Shanaz. Shanaz, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Victor. So first of all, thank you to all of you for, I think we're going now into the 3rd hour and everyone is still here. So well done to all of us. In this session, we'll be looking at feedback from the breakout groups. We'll take about 20 minutes. And what I'd like to do now is to invite each of the group leaders to feedback. We'll go in order of the groups. So we'll start with group 1, which was Vosita. So Vosita, over to you. So you'll present for about, if there's 4 groups, about just over 5, say 7.5 minutes. And again, as before, I'll put my camera on, so just so we can be fair to everyone. So over to you, Vasita.
So thank you very much. It was an interesting discussion, and we had a lot of examples, I would say, about what people wanted to illustrate for these 3 questions as answers. So the first one on how to effectively integrate scientific evidence. Some of the answers we had focused on developing a connection between the universities and policymakers to mainstream climate change issues. Then development of a common agenda, or having a common agenda between politicians, lawmakers, and academicians to put forward climate change in the national context as a priority. And then also increasing and enhancing the literacy of policymakers on climate change and the need for climate action, and using common language to stress the importance of coordination between the sectors. There was also a point on how youth scientists could also contribute to the scientific process, and also giving them the opportunity to engage in national processes. That was also made as part of this question. Going to question 2, the capacity gaps in integrating climate change, integrating climate change or climate policies into economic sectors. So one was the technical expertise that was highlighted to ensure that this action could happen, that is integrating climate action into economic sectors. Then on developing robust logic to influence policymakers to integrate substantial budgetary arrangements. So there are examples on the need for budgets and the importance of allocating finance for climate action in different sectors, which was discussed. Then there was also an example of how climate modeling is important, the need for that, the capacity building of this, so that countries, especially LDCs, could have long-term climate models that could predict or integrate climate risks and hazards into decision-making related to economic sectors. And then on building capacities, on inclusive and participatory processes, and also national ownership and engagement of private sector. One was about awareness, the raising of awareness of stakeholders about the importance of their engagement and their role in this process. And then also setting up a regulatory body so that national government could have multiple stakeholders involved in the process. And then capacity building or scaling up, and urgently scaling up capacity building of multiple stakeholders. And recognizing the actions that are being taken by the private sector, because there are actions that are there, but also building on these and enhancing actions and contributions that they make to the processes that we're discussing today. I hope that we took everything in, and there was also a point that was made, which I think we missed inputting on this slide, about the impacts of COVID-19 and how this could be taken as an opportunity to actually bring economic sectors into climate action, as well as engaging different stakeholders in enhancing climate action. So I think we have presented all the discussed points, and I'm very thankful for everyone who gave their best in the group work, as well as to our rapporteur, Arifin, who's consulting for the UNFCCC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosita. So I'm going to now look to Dr. Fofana for Group 2.
Thank you.
Are you there? Yes, you're there.
I'm
Thank
here.
you.
I'm just probably sharing our screen with that. Just a second. We'll be having that first. While I'm waiting, I would like to just thank you to the member of the group for the question. Very useful insight, and also experience that they shared during that discussion. So, on our working group, we have 3 main questions that we are trying to answer. One is linked to the capacity building play to strengthen an institutional system and incorporate climate change action in the National Development Plan. There is one consensus that the capacity of the decision makers, mostly high-profile people, ministry, prime minister, must be strengthened and ensure the seamless coordination with people in the field because there is some kind of disconnection with the decision maker and technician in the field. So they would like really to see how we can support and build the capacity of the decision maker to understand what is going on in the field and how they can link into the policy and strengthen the plan as well. The second point is that the groups mentioned that the angle that we have on how we position climate change in institutions sometimes create issues, because framing climate change as a development issues and not as an environment issues is important, because the fact of most of the country, they see climate change issues as environmental issues, and other institutional or other ministry will not consider that as something really important. This will reduce really the institutional fragmentation, and because most of the ministry will work as in silo, which is not really good to have something more collectively way. The third thing and the last one that they mentioned is that the future leaders and the network must be strengthened, because the work we are currently doing, if the future leaders that are not understanding, the pro and cons and how they can play a positive role on that, then our work will be not really considered as it is. So the point that the group mentioned is that how we can support the future leaders through capacity buildings, through academia, and help them to really have enough knowledge and tools to play the role that they're supposed to play in a certain way. The second question is, what are the capacity gaps at the subnational and local level to implement climate policy? There is some point that mentioned from the group that there is a really clear evidence that there is a disconnect between the national level and the subnational local level. And there are some barriers sometimes that affect that part. One is the language barriers, because most of the local, let's say, municipality, they're not really well educated, but they know exactly what they're doing in a certain way. But when people come with complex approach, they're not seeing themselves. And also making the connection with concrete and consulting subnational local level, because most of the local and the subnational, they are not seeing themselves at the national plan, because they see there's no link what they're doing at the municipality level. And the way to do is how we can build the capacity to the national level, have some approach, making sure that the local level are taken into consideration and make that connection with concrete result. And there is a need of a case study, with best practice, an example that can work and show them what they can do in a certain way. And one point to mention is academia and network have existing international and national connection will be developed, right? Generate a network of university, of academia around climate change, how they can integrate more curricula that link to that to support really that part of the capacity building. The last question is about the turnover, the challenge regarding to that, and also how they can be, this capacity will be used in a certain way. And people mentioned that building the capacity of the new staff and have a handover process, because most of the issues in such an institution, there is no handover process. And when the new staff come, they need also to restart again and, starting to learn again, it is a wasting of time. And when it's come to work with the new staff, there's a lot of issues on, helping them to up to speed. So that process, building the capacity of the new staff and also making sure that the handover process will have really to reduce the burden at that point. And the second point was really important for the group as well, is that they said focal points should be not individual, but should be a group of people or an institution. Because when you just choose one person to ensure the retention, sometimes it's not good when the person left or when the person is really, overload in terms of initiative. It's good to have a group of person that have the same knowledge, the same training, and respond as the focal points to serve well the role and then they need to do. So that's let's say the summary of what we conclude under the Breakout Group 2. And again, thank you so much for the group for the insight and the excellent contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm going to hand over to Group 3 now. That's you, Lena.
Thank you so much, Shinaz. I can share it, or Eva, would you share the presentation? Just a second. That's the technical issues. Just give me a second and I'll share the presentation. Does it work? Yeah, thank you so much, Eva. Thanks for the support. Eva has been supporting me in my breakout session. Great. Yes, thank you so much for the colleagues who joined my group. We've been discussing 3 questions on building capacity to align national climate and SDG relevant targets. So on the first question, we looked at where focal points are located within different ministries, within different sectors. So there are certain constraints and the lack of communication because of these different locations of focal point for the different agendas. And also zooming into the SDG targets, of course, there's much more complexity that we need to look at, and not only at the SDG targets, but as we have to take a look at every topic. And so bringing together these different focal points is difficult, because these are people and we're talking about individuals, but also we are talking about systems and institutions, of course. And we heard this in the previous presentation, that focal points cannot be individuals, but should be rather a group of people to retain that knowledge. And we looked at that as well, retaining knowledge. I'll get to that in a second. We see that it's critical to build capacities at the institutional level, not only at the individual level. We as JSZ also see that there's the individual level, the institutional level, and also we have the systemic societal level. So it is critical to build capacities on all levels in order to get these synergies. We also see that the climate change agenda and other agendas, for example, the biodiversity agenda, which oftentimes are in the same ministry, in the Ministry of Environment, are not even linked. So if we look at SDGs, we have to dig a bit deeper and see, so who is responsible for pushing forward this agenda, and then see how we can bring these people together. And also, it has been one experience of this whole of society approach that when all participants and stakeholders are at the table, there's a lot of cooperative learning. So that's also connected to the linkage of these synergies, of these different agendas. We see that it's important to have these interlinkages at the international level, to find synergies, to have peer-to-peer learning, to maybe also use blueprints, methods, instruments that have been tried out at the national level, and then also bring to the international level. It opens up a space for exchanging experience of similar national contexts, for example, SIDS, and can help develop integrated projects and programs, and peer-to-peer learning can work as an avenue to facilitate retention of capacities at the institutional level, and that could be North-South and South-South cooperation. And it can also be helpful to contribute to synergies at project level, but also at the policy level. So what are the capacity gaps for coherent monitoring and evaluation? We saw that not only is the systemic approach at the 3 capacity building levels important, but also at the regional and the local level. So we see that it's vertical and horizontal integration that is necessary in order to have this current monitoring and evaluation. We see that there's a need for technical expertise and funding. We've talked a lot about data management and MRV systems as well. But also peer learning processes for monitoring and evaluation across different sectors can be possible. And also we looked at the methodology of to measure contribution of non-state actors, but also on the municipal level. And our colleague from Italy shared some of their learnings that they had with ICLAI and the Covenant of Mayors, which I find is a very interesting learning process from Italy that can surely also be used for other countries. The next slide, please. And then the third question, we tackled cooperative learning for decision makers that are in charge of implementing sustainable development and climate agendas. And again, we came back to the vertical and the horizontal level and looked at, okay, how do we bring these together? And if these people are, these individuals at the same table, something happens, right? Synergy comes in, and you all know this, we're sitting all at home, but once we're at the same table, we have even more fruitful discussions and shared ownership of these processes, and cooperative learning goes beyond the sole meeting that we're having, but also goes on after that. So we see that cooperative learning also is necessary on a global level. As GSZ, we're supporting the NAP Global Network, for example, the NEC partnership, and we see that there's a lot of exchange, especially on South-South, but also North-South and South-North. So participatory learning, where different methods and instruments are shared and scaled up in another country, also via these platforms and learning networks. And we see that it's interesting to have government officials or individuals and other stakeholders to work on national challenges together, and not only looking at the climate change challenge, but also, as I think Male has said before, looking at climate change as a development agenda and not as an environmental aspect or problem even. And then we also talked a bit about about the implementation and investment planning for NDCs, because when we look at this in a coherent and integrated manner, SDGs are also incorporated in this and can be integrated so that cooperative learning can also be used across the board, and not only for the NDCs or for investment planning and budgeting for climate mitigation, but also adaptation and sustainable development. Thank you so much. I'm giving back to the moderators.
Thank you. And last we have Daniel, Group 4. Hi, Daniel. It's been a long time. Nice to see you again. Very nice. Yes, over to you, Daniel.
Nice to see you too, Shanaz. Thanks, everyone. So for our breakout group discussion, which was focused on co-benefits, I'd like to pick up on one of Lena's last points, which was the idea of climate change as a development agenda, right? And how complicated also, how natural it is in a way, but also how difficult it is sometimes to, whereas there is a lot of complementarity in what different stakeholders think about pushing the climate change or climate action agenda forward, there's a lot of complementarities in what different sectors, different stakeholders want to do, but there's also a number of clashing points, and those we explored in our group discussion. And, not just in relation to climate, to capacity building or capacity strengthening, but also maybe in the way of framing the issue, the way that, understanding what exactly are the priorities, what are the problems. In doing that framing, in understanding what topics, what knowledges even also to bring to the table, and which knowledges maybe are, is there such a thing as a prioritization of knowledge? Is it a valid question even to ask? These are the things that I sense came up a lot in our discussion. So in the first question around what gaps in knowledge and learning are blocking progress on the SDGs, I'll just mention a couple of points. I won't go through everything, but there's a sense that the predominant knowledge tends to be overly technical, and that makes it difficult sometimes to relate or meaningful at local levels, at grassroots levels. Now, it doesn't mean, of course, that the implication here is that probably there is a prioritization of certain knowledges that are not so digestible at local level, and I think that's an issue to address as well. So the point here being, let's make sure that grassroots knowledge, grassroots level indigenous knowledge is part of the mix, is part of the way that knowledge is put together, is cooked, and is presented. Policy is an important element of the puzzle, but not always a driver. For me, this was an interesting thing that came in our discussion. So focus on the process, focus on the inclusion. People were saying always get input from stakeholders. A government representative was saying, we need to know what people know about climate change in order to understand, not only, and I mean people, I mean all stakeholders, in order to understand where the gaps are, but also, what they feel, how they respond, what are the differentiated impacts. And really understanding this properly is the only way to really then address what are the gaps that are blocking progress on developing co-benefits and advancing on all of the SDGs. There was an issue around knowledge today. Is it obsolete tomorrow? Or, the obsolescence of knowledge over time. But that's why bodies like the IPCC exist, to try to bring all this together. And again, here we came to, that realizing that's a major achievement. And at the same time, does that also mean that some of the knowledge, some of the more like grassroots, humanities, ethical understandings of the problematic, are those left out of the mainstream conversations, and what can be done to overcome that? On the second one, in achievements, I'll come back to the idea of IPCC executive reports, as really important way for people and for decision makers to advance and move ahead with a, important level playing field. And again, the involvement of a wide range of stakeholders in policy development and implementation, which is easy to say. We've said it for millions, I don't know millions, but for decades, but it's still an important message. And if we go to the next one to come to our final discussions, what can we learn from actions and policies? Aligning public and private finance flows to climate objectives. So let's not just look at the climate risks, but focusing on what are the opportunities, job creation, poverty reduction. How can that also be a driver for advancing the priorities and the policies? The idea, as we mentioned, of rediscovering sources, I say rediscovering because these are maybe just the knowledge are there, the disciplines are there, but they are not central enough perhaps to the climate and development centers of discussion. So let's bring those back, and we're talking again really more meaningfully bring indigenous traditional knowledge, but also, the idea, as some people brought up, around, again, what does it mean for an adaptation or a climate initiative to be relevant, and to be meaningful? Does it have to equate to the idea that it makes a business case? Well, there was an opposition to this idea. Maybe it shouldn't be a business case what makes a good climate action. Maybe it's more about the ethical part of it. It's not you cannot assign a monetary value to understanding what is a good adaptation or a mitigation way forward. And in doing that, again, we say this because it does link to the learning, to the knowledge, because it does mean that the assumptions that have been built in order to understand what a good climate action is may have to be slightly widened in order to incorporate all these ethical, even philosophical, but very grounded ideas of what should drive us forward in terms of climate action and climate priorities. And finally, in terms of what skills are needed, just saying what other colleagues said around before, the horizontal and vertical integrations, communication among stakeholders, still proving to be a challenge. The integration of knowledge, as we said, from humanities, from ethical perspectives, insufficient understanding of what it means to achieve co-benefits. And this was, I think, a very interesting input from a participant around, she claims from her research basically that there's this gap still. What does it mean to achieve co-benefits? And here again, we maybe come to the initial departure point. Where do we, from a stakeholder A, stakeholder B, see the success of a climate action or, a development policy going? Is it about then, what do you identify as the co-benefits? Is it improving on gender equality, for example, or is it really making sure that, emissions are reduced by X%? So understanding, where the co-benefits are and having the opportunity to communicate between stakeholders to say, okay, let's maybe not agree from day one, but maybe on day 10, we will agree that we want to move in this direction and and compromise at some point to identify and understand the other party's co-benefit with the idea of what their co-benefits might mean, or what their benefits mean, what your benefits mean, and where can we meet middle ground. So that process is seen as really important, Shenaz. And I think actually, I'll leave it at that because the final point we already mentioned. But really as a final sentence, stakeholder engagement is really chaotic. Can be chaotic. Revision of assumptions, taking a step back can be a chaotic, scary step. But it seemed from our discussion that it's a helpful step. It's a way to be more genuinely inclusive and move forward the discussion in a happy way for a wide set of stakeholders involved. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Daniel. So we're moving into the closing of the session now. And I'll just spend about two and a half minutes just giving you some of my reflections. I'll then hand over to Makoto and then we'll close up. Firstly, I just want to thank everyone for sticking with the session for 3 hours. I mean, the virtual space is not easy to navigate, but we're all still here, so well done to all of us. And I think what has opened up is that the virtual space has meant that we have people present who would not have been there otherwise. So I think, so for that, I think I'm really grateful. And then in terms of what is coming out, I think what I hear clearly is that and I know it's come up in a lot of the work that we've also been doing as CDKN and South North, is this about viewing climate change as a development agenda. I think it's a real challenge to all of us, and it's something that we can take to our work, but they can also go in the report and take it forward to the PCCB. What I also heard clearly from everyone is that language can be an issue, and that we need a common language, and it needs to be simple so that there's no issues that emerge from that. And then on a bigger level, what's coming across is that there needs to be some sort of alignment of systems, retention within these systems. We need integration across the systems, vertically, horizontally. And then there's an opportunity to look out for pilots and best practice that can be shared and celebrated, and particularly pulling the learnings from that and sharing and celebrating that and using them as inspiration for other countries, other organizations and institutions. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Makoto now, but I want to thank you all again. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Shanaz. And also I would like to echo my appreciation, echo the Shanaz's comments to appreciate all the participants and the Secretariat. Today, we had a discussion, very important discussion of having NDC climate related work, or LTS, others and also integration of development goals. And I think it's very important to consider the alignment and the integration because, for example, NDCs and climate change, climate action is not; these are not standalone. And so, in this regard, we actually saw lots of good cases, tools, and so we had a sharing of lots of challenges and opportunities. And we really appreciate all the contributions coming from panelists, presenters, as well as those who made intervention in the middle of the plenary session and group out discussions. I am under the impression that, we are still in the middle of somewhere. We're still, there are lots of things we need to do more. And I think in this regard, we're happy to continue this kind of interaction and also mutual learning and involving people who can join us for our work. Nobody should left behind, and we should actually inclusively realize climate actions and also sustainable development. So I think this is a really good opportunity for us to share our efforts, and then I hope this kind of discussion should be continued for further actions. So thank you very much. And then finally, I would like to hand over to my dear colleagues with Daniele Violetti. Daniele Violetti, Director of the Means of Implementation Division at the UNFCCC Secretariat, who give us a few words to close this meeting. So over to you, Daniele.
Thank you, Makoto, and good day to all participants. And indeed, it's wonderful to see so many participants following the forum, and especially as was said that at the very end of a long 3-hour session. But this is just a testimony that addressing climate change is a really international priority, and particularly when dealing with issues as important as building capacity to address climate and development goals coherently. So looking back a bit since the establishment of the Durban Forum in 2011, this has been a platform for parties, representative of constituted bodies under the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, relevant expert practitioners to share their experience and exchange ideas, best practices, lessons learned on the implementation of capacity building activities in the context of specific thematic areas. This role was further strengthened with the establishment of the PCCB, the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, and the thematic alignment of the Durban Forum with the focus area on the theme of the PCCB. This was an important step as well. And today's discussion highlighted how important a building block for capacity building is to addressing climate and development goals. So we heard from panelists and participants on the necessity to mainstream climate and development goals into policy planning and identify capacity gaps and needs that could impede the coherent implementation of both and hinder a sustainable recovery. So as countries continue communicating their updated NDCs ahead of COP26 this year, and governments led efforts on the 2030 agenda, I believe that the discussion we had today was important in shedding light on the work that lies ahead. This is all very, very critical for the process itself of climate change, of course, but in broad sense for the development agenda as well. So the outcome of the discussion was mentioned, will be presented at the 5th meeting of the PCCB. The PCCB will then take stock of this outcome and use them to assist in the identification of concrete action points and recommendation to the COP on issues relevant to the topics addressed today. So finally, let me also, on behalf of the Secretariat, express my appreciation and gratitude to all participants, panelists, group leaders, for taking the time out of your busy schedules, of course, and attending the forum, and to our co-facilitators for their excellent job in facilitating. So let me just close that reaffirming that the Durban Forum has been and will continue to be an important part of the capacity building arrangements established under the convention. So for now, I can only thank you again, and I will invite both Shenath and Makoto to proceed with the closing of the 10th Durban Forum. Thanks again on behalf of the Secretariat and the full capacity building team. Thank you very much.
Makoto, over to you to close the session.
Okay. Now, so we are finally closing the session, and then for the as you see the screen will please go back to the menti.com, and then also please describe this 10th Durban Forum in one word. So we are having lots of nice words: enlightening, collaborative, learning. So perhaps what we can do, we have some more. Informative, great, enlightening. Okay. So I think this is really encouraging, and I hope we can do. We hope this is going to be a really good input to the further our efforts in the UNFCCC process and also implementation at home. Thank you very much.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Daniele.